Hello students, today we are going to be discussing elements of literature and elements of a story. You may have heard this before, always good for a refresher. So here we go. Most stories contain some kind of symbol, something that is symbolic. It can be a person, it can be an object, it can be an idea, it can be an action. The thing about a symbol is that it is complex and it means several different things. As we go through the short stories, we will kind of look at things that are symbolic and what they might be symbolic of, because really it can be anything. And a lot of movies have this as well. They will have things that are symbolic kind of embedded throughout the film that, unless you're a very mindful viewer of the film, you might get lost on, although you would see that something's up with that. You know, in movies, because they often focus in on the symbol itself, they'll do close-ups, or it'll appear in different formats, or they'll have different camera angles on something that is symbolic. And a lot of times symbolism can be pretty universal, even through different cultures and different countries, especially Western symbolism, as opposed to, say, Eastern symbolism, although sometimes the symbolism transcends culture. Here's a book I have, it's called Signs and Symbols, and it's a great little guide for every little thing that could be a symbol, like what do heads mean? How are buildings symbolic? How would a staircase be symbolic, or a doorway? So, I mean, you can even buy books on these things, and once again, this kind of goes through all the different cultures as well. It touches upon everything from, say, numbers, to the sun, to the sky, to the planets, numerology. We're mostly familiar with symbols like of religions, say of the cross or something like that. Things, the emblems that you wear would be symbolic. So we'll go into more detail about symbolism because it's a very broad kind of way of understanding what the author is trying to say, sometimes just within the context of the film or the novel, sometimes in a kind of broader understanding. The next is metaphor. Students often get this mixed up. Metaphor is that like or as. Okay, that's an action, dialogue, a thing, an idea, an object, anything that is compared to something else. It only has one meaning, whereas symbols have layers of meaning. Symbolism is like an onion. You keep peeling back the layers and you can find more meaning. Imagery is used all of the time in poems, movies, novels, any kind of written work, and there's all different kinds of imagery. Of course, you are familiar with, sight, taste, sound, touch, but there's also like organic imagery, which would be more about how you feel. That would be more organic or visceral kind of imagery. The best writers will use words that convey imagery, which means you can feel it, see it, touch it, smell it in your mind. So instead of saying something like virtual teaching is complicated, I could say virtual teaching is thorny. That gives you a very kind of the sensation of touch. It hurts, it's prickly. Thorny gives you a better visual, not just of the thorns and the sharp points on the thorns themselves, but if those sharp thorns prick you. I could also say virtual teaching. You could say virtual learning is knotty, Knotty, like a knot. So by saying virtual teaching is knotty, I've used imagery because you see a knot. You know how complex and how difficult it is to unravel a knot. So those are words that evoke imagery and are much more fun to read than saying something like the word complicated. Mood. We see mood in movies all the time. And so a lot of times I'm going to use movie examples because those you're more familiar with, sadly, than books or stories. If a movie opens up dark and dreary, and there's only like grayish kinds of colors. You can see that is the mood that they are evoking, is a dark, dreary mood. Sometimes this is throughout the entire movie or throughout an entire novel. Oftentimes it's just in the scenes, but it gives you the feeling, the mood of it. If any of you watched Game of Thrones, you would have seen that whenever they were up north, the lighting was gray and dreary. When they were in the south, it was much more colorful, conveying the starkness, of the family, the Starks. Double whammy there. So the word itself, Stark, actually is symbolic in Game of Thrones, because not only is the family have stark things happen to them, they live in a stark landscape. And so the director portrays that using just kind of gray and very drab kind of stark colors, as opposed to those in the hotter climates where it's all full of color and light. Mood is the feeling or emotion that you get either from the entire text itself, or in most cases, just particular scenes. Some scenes can be dark, some creepy, some fun, some lighthearted, some surrealistic. So the mood is conveyed through words or imagery. Irony, you're probably used to hearing this all the time, and sometimes things are ironic, but sometimes they're just weird. So irony really, in its simplest terms, is you have an expectation and it is not met. In fact, it's usually the opposite. So you would not expect a fire station to burn down. That would be an example of ironic. I mean, it really just could be faulty wiring and a bunch of other things, but ultimately it would be ironic for a fire station to burn down, just as it would be for a police station to get robbed. We talked a little bit about structure in the other video, and so structure is really how the story is laid out to give you the actual story. It can be done in a lot of ways. It can be done in flashbacks. It can be backwards and forwards. It can be in different perspectives. There's movies where there are different perspectives of a single event. There are movies where there's continuous flashbacks. So structure is just really how the story is presented. And we will look a little bit more at structure as we go through some of our sample short stories. Backstory. So this is more of a literary term, something that authors would use. Backstory is when you are reading something and you open up a book or a story, you're like, hey, well, like I'm coming in on the middle of this person's life. What happened? Okay, like you could look at me and say, hey, what is Mrs. Flores' backstory? Like you really know nothing about me at all, right? You don't know about my life. You don't know anything. So if I'm telling you a story about my life and I'm moving forward as a story, sometimes I have to give you some backstory. When you use backstory, you're actually helping the reader or the viewer understand why they are the way they are, what events made them that way. We see this in a lot of crime kind of shows where, you'll see the serial killer and what he's doing, and then they'll do like a flashback, or they'll like pretend like go into his brain, and they'll give you the backstory and show you why that serial killer is now, chopping heads off of women. Because when you go back, you see whatever it is that happened, and that explains it. So that's giving you the backstory. It used to be in old time novels that the first couple chapters were backstories. And we don't like that anymore. We find it kind of boring. So in a lot of stories, you actually get the backstory either through narration or some kind of quick flashback. In a film, you will get the flashback. You'll get that kind of, fading out of the screen, and then you'll know that you're in their brain and they're having a memory of something. Once again, this is done so you have fully understand the character. It provides characterization. You understand the character more now, knowing their backstory. We also discussed in the previous video setting. Setting can be anything. Setting can be this room. Setting can be a time frame. During the time of COVID in Southern California, in Riverside County. Those can all be setting. Setting can also be the heat or the temperature. Setting can be the politics of the time. Setting can be the weather. Any of those things can be setting. So when we look at some stories, we're actually going to look at the settings and how you identify all the different kinds of setting. Have you ever watched a movie or TV show and you're confused because you don't know what the setting is? They're just showing you a city and you don't know, is that city in the future? Is it a sci-fi city? Is it a city in the past? What's going on? So a lot of times movies that aren't done too well, you're really confused about the setting. You really don't know where you are in the story. And people like context. They like to know where they are in the setting. The setting plays a huge, huge, huge part of most stories. It's something that a author will really consider deeply before writing a story, because it plays in essence, it's almost takes on a life of its own. It's its own kind of character. There's going to be elements of setting that essentially become part of the story, things that you can't change. You need that setting for the story to take place. The next thing we're going to discuss is diction, aka words or language. Diction is the fancy pants word for it. Diction just means words. And stories have a kind of diction, a certain kind of word choice that they use. If you've ever picked up a book and you go to Amazon and you click you click open that, open up inside feature and you read the first couple pages, you automatically get a feel for the author's way of writing, their choice of diction. Is it a fun read? Is it a quick read? Is it a scary read? Are the sentences too long? Are the sentences too short? Is it kind of sassy? Is it kind of snappy or sarcastic? That is all done with the use of diction, with the use of the words, the kind of words that you use. Words are very important. They matter in every component of life. So we'll be looking at diction when we go through the short stories. As you'll find out, the author I chose, Kurt Vonnegut, writes for every man. His words are easy to understand. They're not particularly high register or academic. It's words that anybody can kind of enjoy and pick up and laugh at or be appalled at. That diction is because he's discussing everyday people and everyday events. So if he's going to discuss everyday people and everyday events, he needs to use everyday diction, the language that we all use, the words we are all familiar with. Once again, if you are a reader, you are familiar with certain authors who write a certain way, and the words that they use, the diction that they use, can impart the tone, the mood. It can convey the feeling you get, the emotion that you get from a novel. Diction is powerful, not just in story, but in nonfiction, reporting, anything anybody says, diction is important. Here's a quick example. If some of you are going to go on dating sites, are you going to say that you are skinny and scrawny? Because that doesn't sound very appealing, does it? Are you going to say you are trim and fit? Trim and fit or skinny scrawny? Trim sounds a whole lot better than scrawny. Are you going to say that you are fussy about your hamburgers? Fussy doesn't have a very good kind of connotation to it. You get bad vibes from somebody who's fussy. Are you going to say that you are a connoisseur of hamburgers, or that you are particular about your hamburgers? Particular just sounds like you like what you want, like you want what you want and how you want it. Finicky just sounds like, ugh, who wants somebody that's finicky? So there's lots of different words to say something like that. Here's another example. Ladies, women don't sweat. We are not sweaty. We perspire, or we glow. I like glow. Diction is important, especially when you're writing those dating ads. Tone. Next, we're going to discuss tone. Now, tone is, we discussed this a little bit in the previous video. There's going to be some overlap, as you've already noticed. That's the writer or the author's attitude toward a subject. The tone can be romantic, it can be witty, it can be sarcastic, it can be snappy, it can be fun. I write in several different genres, and each one has a different tone. Some are dark and grim, and some are fun and snappy. So how I write those sentences, how I convey what I need to convey is done through the language. And once again, we're going to be looking at that. I'm going to give you examples of that as we go through the short stories, because really examples are the best thing. But next time you watch a movie or a Netflix show, look at the tone of things. Even something like Lucifer, and I think everybody's watched Lucifer by now. Okay, so we've got horrible things happening, right? Like horrible things, and dead bodies happening, and evil happening, and yet we're laughing at it. Why? It's the tone. It's how the director portrays that horrible thing. If Lucifer is appalled or he gets angry about it, it's just with that hint that doesn't make it as horrible, say, as a horror movie would. Think about the difference between a horror movie and that tone as compared to like a murder mystery, and you're still seeing blood and dead bodies, but the tone is much different. Next thing we're going to discuss is POV. POV is point of view. There's first person, there's very few second persons, and third person. And we already kind of discussed how third person is more, you're in one head. So if you have 5 people in a room, you're only in one person's head. And for the author, if you're in multiple heads, that gets real confusing. In murder mysteries, you're usually in one person's head, whether it's the first person I or the third person, he, she, because you only know what that person knows. You only understand what that he, she knows. So if it's a murder mystery and the author is in the head of the murderer, they're going to let that out, and that's no fun. So there are a lot of times that writers will play with this. One of the books I can think of was Presumed Innocent. It was also made into a movie. Spoiler alert! It's about an attorney who gets blamed for the death of his partner. I think it's his partner. So it's in his POV. Both the book is in his head, just in his POV. It's the I, as well as the movie is just in his head. So you see kind of everything more from his perspective. You don't know what's going on in the other person's head so much. And so, they're finding all these ways how he is guilty, but reality he is innocent, but somehow you kind of question it till the very, very end. You just think, how did he get away with this murder? Like, how did he do it? It is not till the very, very end of the movie and the novel when he goes downstairs and he goes into a locked cabinet and he unwraps I think it's a hatchet, or an axe. He unwraps the axe and there's blood all over it. And he looks at it and you're like, oh, he did it. I knew he did it, right? And then you hear his wife calling. He looks up, his wife is calling, and he says, I would do anything to protect my wife's innocence. Who was presumed innocent? The wife. Nobody ever suspected her. And so you kind of learn, there's little clues throughout both the movie and the book that tell you that it was the wife's. But for most people, like, oh my gosh. They also did that with the movie Gone Girl. So they play with perspective, and authors love to play with perspective because it's fun to trick the reader, to trick the viewer of the movie. So lots of fun. So when you see that next time, go, oh, POV, they did that on purpose. Once again, POV is something very critical to all writers. And before I write any book, I have to figure out what my POV is in. I write in both first person POV. I find it a lot of ways easier with this particular genre that I tell, because I'm not in everybody's head, just the one main character's head. So I can have the element of surprise coming at the main character, or third person POV. There's different things that are required of each POV, and I'll give you a quick example. If I'm writing in first person POV, I cannot hear or see or feel something that is not directly coming at me. So, for example, I can't, right now my blinds are closed. I can't say as a first person POV, the mailman rang the doorbell. Why can't I say that? I don't see my door. I don't see the mailman. So I can't say the door that the mailman rang the doorbell because I don't see it. I can hear the doorbell. I could write the doorbell rang. Whereas in a third person POV, the author can write, the mailman rang the doorbell. Does that make sense? So the mailman rang the doorbell in a third person POV. But if it's my perspective, I can't say the mailman rang the doorbell if I can't physically see the mailman. So both of those third person and first person POVs have different kinds of advantages and disadvantages for both the writer and the reader. Allusion is next. Now, allusion can be a little bit tricky because it's what's in a movie or a text or a short story or long story, whatever, novel, that actually inside that is referring to something else. It can refer to another movie, another text, another poem. It can refer to a famous person. It can refer to an event in history. So they're just making this, they're alluding to, ALL, alluding to something else. They want you to make the connection. If I say that if I describe my garden in such a way that you have the image that it is the Garden of Eden, then I've alluded to the Garden of Eden. And then immediately you would understand that there may be some spiritual or religious aspect of whatever my story is about, or that I will commit a sin that makes me fall from grace and have to leave the garden. There's a lot of different ways allusions can be used in any kind of art form. Hyperbole is next. Teenagers are the masters of hyperbole. You rock at this. This is your game. I'm going to die without my cell phone. That's hyperbole or a hyperbolic statement. If I don't go to the prom, I'm going to wither away. Same kind of thing. Hyperbole is a exaggerated attempt to make your point. Like I said, it's in your playbook. It's not meant to be taken literally. A lot of people have a tough time with hyperbole because they take things too literally. You're not going to die if you don't have your cell phone. It may feel like you're dying, but not really. Sometimes hyperbole is just used for a laugh. Sometimes to make you understand more about what's going on inside of the person. So if you tell me that I have to get rid of my phone for a week, I'm not going to say I'm going to die without it. I might say something like, this is going to be really challenging. So, but if you say you're going to die without your cell phone, of course you don't mean you're going to die without your cell phone, but it does mean that everything you hold dear is gone, which is a little bit like a death. It reveals more about the character or person saying that hyperbole, and thus provides characterization. Theme. Now, we discussed this in the other video, and all novels, movies, most things have a theme to them, and we will practice with theme as we go through the short stories. Even the articles that we've read are thematic. You can tease a theme out of there, and that's just kind of the overview of what it's all about. That's all theme is, the overview of what it's all about. Allegory is another literary technique, and we do not see this too often because most people don't understand allegory. Not that they don't understand the word, they don't understand the concept so much. So a book like Animal Farm, it is a very old novel, and it's about animals that speak, and they're on a farm and there's an uprising. It's an allegory for politics, and each animal really portrays a particular type, and each character portrays a particular type of political ideology or political kind of person. So that is an allegory. It's where something means something else. When somebody tells a story and they say it's an allegory, that's what they mean. The Bible has lots of allegories. They will tell a parable or a tale, but it's really an allegory meant for you to understand something else. For example, people get some treasure or they get a coin. One person spends it and makes more money. Another person doesn't do anything with it, makes no money. The other person buries it so it's safe. I think it's a king that gives them talents or the coins. And so really it's a tale about taking your talents, your actual talents, and what you do with them. Do you go out into the world and use your talents and give back and therefore become better and grow more and help the people around you? Or do you take your talent and bury it so it's safe? So it's really an allegory. It's meant to tell you something else. It's a bigger picture. Many stories in the Bible are allegories. We discussed flashbacks already. Once again, we see flashbacks mostly in movies, and it is done through that, fading out scene. So it just tells us what happened in the past. Sometimes a flashback could be something that happened a half hour ago or yesterday. Other times a flashback might be the character's backstory, why they are the way they are, what events in their life caused them to be the kind of person they are. Foreshadowing is the last term we're going to tackle today. And foreshadowing, once again, a term you should be very familiar with. It is the author's little clue about what's to come. When you read it, sometimes you kind of immediately understand it's foreshadowing and call it out. Other times you just get a feeling, and that's really the same thing. You get a feeling something bad is going to happen. Especially in movies, this is portrayed with perhaps them zooming in on a character and they're making some kind of face. And that face isn't the face, that expression isn't the expression that you thought it would be. And in a lot of times that is foreshadowing either their future behavior or something that will come. But you just read their expression, you're like, ooh, something's not right. So you get this feeling, and that would be foreshadowing. There's a saying by a famous Russian novelist, Anton Chekhov, and he says to writers, if there's a gun on the mantle in the first chapter, it better go off by the end. What he's saying here is you, the writer, writing that there's a gun on the mantle is foreshadowing that gun will be used somehow. We just don't know who or what in the future. And if it's not, then it is very, very poor writing. Okay, so that would be foreshadowing. And we see this a lot in movies, like I said, especially with close-ups. And also the same in a lot of ways with novels. They will have a close-up of something. Remember, a writer can write anything they want. Why are they going to write about that specific thing as opposed to something else? All of it is foreshadowing. And why do you foreshadow? So that writers have that sense of anticipation, that feeling. A lot of times it's to create suspense or creepiness or surprise at the end. And sometimes a writer can totally play with you, as can a film director, and draw your attention to things and then totally trick you in the end. People normally don't like that. They feel they have been fooled and manipulated. But good foreshadowing gives you that feeling, but you can't quite pinpoint it. But if you actually go back and you look at that novel really closely, or you go back and really break down that film, you can see exactly why and where and how you got that foreshadowing feeling. Okay, that's it for today, students. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay smart. Bye-bye.